We are also in our usual groove of expecting more breaking and developing news over the course of the evening. That's in part because of a big story that was broken late tonight by the Wall Street Journal. And this story, here's the headline. This story that the Wall Street Journal has broken tonight is something that all the legal experts are now telling us we should have probably expected. Maybe that's true. Maybe we all just should have guessed that this was coming or that this had been happening behind the scenes. But it doesn't feel like it. For those of us who've been watching this presidency of late and have been watching the scandal that envelops this presidency more and more on a daily basis, this news tonight, broken by the Wall Street Journal, it does feel like a surprise. Right, you see the headline there, goes right to the heart of the matter. Manafort sought deal in next trial. That means Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort sought a deal with Robert Mueller, with the prosecutors at the special counsel's office who are about to put him on trial for another round of felony charges in federal court. But, quote, talks broke down. To understand why, at least to the non-lawyers among us, this is such a jarring headline tonight, you just stand back for a second and look at the big picture in terms of the legal trouble and the legal investigations that are circling this president and his family and his business and his charity and his campaign right now, right? The biggest news of the past week was, of course, the president's longtime lawyer pleading guilty on 8 federal felony charges. In his plea out loud in court and in the criminal information that was filed by prosecutors in conjunction with his guilty plea, Trump lawyer Michael Cohen not only admitted himself to committing 8 felonies, he implicated the president himself in 2 of those felonies, saying the president had directed him to commit those crimes. Cohen's plea deal also implicated the president's business, the Trump Organization, including 2 specified employees, Executive 1 and Executive 2 at the president's business. Cohen also implicated another business called American Media, which is the publisher of the National Enquirer tabloid, among other publications. Cohen's plea also implicated people from the president's campaign. Cohen's court appearance last week and documents prosecutors filed in conjunction with that plea, therefore appeared to be a sort of roadmap indicating other potential indictments in the future, or at least pointing to other co-conspirators in these felonies to which Michael Cohen pled guilty, right? Which related to him using illicit payments to illegally influence the presidential election. Now, are there going to be further prosecutions of the people who are implicated in Cohen's plea deal? We don't know. Will these allegations of other conspirators participating with him in his crimes, will that lead to further investigation, which may lead to other criminal cases? We don't know. But late last week, we did get word that the district attorney in New York is, quote, considering pursuing criminal charges against the Trump Organization, which is the president's business, and 2 senior company officials in connection with the criminal acts to which Cohen pled in federal court last week. The news also simultaneously broke that the New York State Attorney General has already sought a criminal referral under state law for New York state tax charges, in addition to the federal tax charges that Michael Cohen has already pled to. That same New York State Attorney General has already brought a lawsuit against the Trump Foundation, the president's charity. The president's foundation, the president himself, and the president's 3 eldest children, Don Jr., Eric, and Ivanka, are all named as defendants in that case from New York State. New York State Attorney General Barbara Underwood has already referred that case against the Trump Foundation to the Public Integrity Division at the U.S. Justice Department, to the Federal Election Commission, and to the IRS for possible federal prosecution. Federal prosecutors also recently brought a huge civil tax case against Ivanka Trump's business partner from what used to be her luxury jewelry brand. Trump Organization executive Allen Weisselberg appears to have worked with prosecutors in the federal case that relates to Michael Cohen and on that New York State case that relates to the Trump Foundation. Reports of Allen Weisselberg's cooperation and possible immunity deal with prosecutors. At this point, those reports are intriguing. They're a little bit hard to sort out. It's fair, I think, to say that we don't yet know how much Trump Organization executive Allen Weisselberg might be talking to prosecutors, how much he's cooperating, whether his immunity deal with them frees him up to talk with prosecutors without fear of being prosecuted himself, just specifically about stuff related to Michael Cohen, or whether Weisselberg's deal also gives him immunity from prosecution on other things related to the president's business interests. But I mean, like that's all happening simultaneously right now, right? All of those things all at once. And that's not even getting into like the emoluments cases, which could result in the production of Trump's tax returns and all of his business records. And all, I mean, if the president, his family, his business interests, his campaign have anything to worry about in terms of past criminal behavior, particularly when it comes to financial crimes, right? Potential campaign finance violations, tax fraud, illicit interactions with Russia that relate ultimately to Russia's interference in the election to benefit Trump. If they've got anything to worry about on any of those fronts, you might imagine that all of these related ongoing investigations might start to feel a little constraining to the president. Right? They might start to seem a little worrying. There's no shortage of legal jeopardy right now for the president, for his family, for the people and entities that are important to him. And honestly, I mean, I don't say that lightly. It is hard to know where the limits of legal jeopardy here might be, not just for the president and his family, but for the entities that are closest to him. And I just want to single out one line here, because I don't think this has had a lot of attention, but it sort of stuck with me over the weekend. And the more I talk to people about it, the more, especially the more I talk to people sort of in the legal system about it, the more this sticks out for me. There is literally a line in the Michael Cohen plea agreement from last week where federal prosecutors spell out that Michael Cohen pleading guilty in federal court last week means that federal prosecutors agree to not further prosecute him for the crimes that he admitted to in court last week. But prosecutors explicitly spell out in the plea agreement with him that they are reserving the right to cite those same felonies as predicate crimes in case they ever want to bring a RICO case in the future on this matter. RICO, that 18 U.S. Code, Section 1961, right? That's racketeering. That's RICO, as in organized crime. Federal prosecutors are reserving the right to charge something here as an organized criminal entity under the RICO statutes, and that relates to Michael Cohen. What? Right? That alone is probably enough to light a little bit of a fire under anybody who believes they might personally end up in the crosshairs of one or more of these now ongoing investigations. But amid all of these different cases and all of these different potential avenues for legal jeopardy for the president and his family and his business and even his charity, even amid all of that, the Paul Manafort case really does stand out. It really does stand alone, right? Michael Flynn, the president's national security advisor, pled guilty. Rick Gates, president's deputy campaign chair, organizer of Trump's inauguration, he's pled guilty. George Papadopoulos, campaign foreign policy advisor, has pled guilty. Even freaking Alex van der Zwaan, random foreign lawyer, pled guilty, right? Paul Manafort has not pled guilty. He stands alone here, and things are now happening to him fast. Of course, the same day Michael Cohen pled guilty in federal court, almost exactly simultaneously to Michael Cohen standing up and pleading guilty to those 8 felonies, Paul Manafort was convicted of 8 felonies by a jury in the Eastern District of Virginia. The day after tomorrow, Wednesday of this week, the prosecutors who convicted Manafort on those 8 felonies, they're going to have to tell the court whether they are going to bring Manafort back to court to retry him on the 10 felony charges for which the jury was not able to reach a verdict. Remember, it was 8 felonies, conviction, 8 felonies, hung jury. Couldn't come to consensus. The foreperson of the jury went out of his or her way to make it publicly known on the verdict sheet that on those 10 charges where they couldn't come to a verdict, 11 of the 12 jurors wanted to convict Manafort on all of them. Only one holdout for the 10 charges on which they didn't get guilty verdicts. Prosecutors know that, and they have the right to put Paul Manafort on trial again for the 10 charges where they got a mistrial, where they were just one juror away from a conviction. We're going to find out the day after tomorrow whether they are going to try Manafort again on those 10 charges. At the same time, prosecutors in the special counsel's office are considering that. They are also steaming toward the start of the next federal felony trial for Manafort. It's interesting. Just a few days ago, the federal court in D.C., that's about to start the second trial for Manafort, they unsealed some of the earlier proceedings that we, the public, hadn't previously had access to in Manafort's D.C. case. That let us see for the first time that even the judge who's overseeing the next Paul Manafort trial, the one in D.C., that judge appears to be mystified by the fact that Manafort didn't consent to all the charges against him just being consolidated in one jurisdiction so he could just go on trial once. The reason Paul Manafort, the Trump campaign chair, the reason he had a trial that ended last week and he's now about to have a new trial that's starting within the next few weeks is simply because he decided he wanted two trials. The government gave him the choice to consolidate them and only go on trial once. He chose to go on trial twice in these two neighboring jurisdictions. Why did he make that choice? We don't know, and neither does the judge in his case. This is from the newly unsealed court transcript in Manafort's case from February 14th in Washington, D.C. This is the judge in Manafort's D.C. case talking to Manafort's defense lawyers. And before this was just unsealed, this had been a sealed proceeding at the bench. Now we know what happened. The judge says in this newly unsealed discussion, quote, "I understand you're hamstrung. Is there any change in Mr. Manafort's point of view about the Eastern District versus the District of Columbia? I think the only thing I can imagine that's more unusual than the government offering you that choice is the choice you're making. But is there any further discussion about that?" Manafort's defense lawyer, Mr. Downing, says no. And then the judge says, "Okay, all right." The judge is saying, are you sure you want your client to go on trial twice? You want two federal felony trials? The judge is saying to the defense lawyers, listen, prosecutors never give anybody the option to drop one of their trials. They're giving you the option to drop one of the trials and just go on trial once. You sure you're not willing to take them up on it? The defense lawyer is like, yep, Your Honor, we're sticking with the plan. Two trials. The judge is like, okay, it's your funeral. Here we go. And so this second trial is about to start, and it's weird. And it's going to happen before this judge who finds it remarkable, in the judge's words, unusual, that Manafort has decided to have a second trial. Incidentally, this judge who's going to be presiding in the D.C. trial is the same judge who ordered Paul Manafort held in jail instead of on house arrest because of allegations that he was tampering with witnesses in his case while he was out on bail. So this next case for Manafort is not promising for a lot of reasons, but it's also going to be significantly different from the case in Virginia where he just got convicted on 8 felonies. We know that in part from the list of more than 1,500 pieces of evidence that the prosecution has now filed for the D.C. case against Manafort. Now, one of the things that's different about this next case for Manafort compared to the last one is that at least some of the evidence in this case that they're going to be citing is apparently in Russian. Look, at least the subject lines of all of these emails that appear on the prosecution's evidence list are written in Cyrillic. This is also the trial where Manafort has a co-defendant on some of the charges. His co-defendant is Konstantin Kilimnik, longtime business associate of Manafort's, who is Russian, who the special counsel's office has said in open court is believed to be associated with Russian intelligence. Kilimnik is also believed to be hiding in Russia right now rather than face these charges alongside Paul Manafort. In addition to being listed as Manafort's co-defendant in the D.C. case, Kilimnik also appears here, we believe, in the evidence list, evidence item number 1194. KK, we believe, is the nickname for Konstantin Kilimnik, and that's the way Manafort referred to him in his consulting business. In the evidence list against Manafort for the D.C. trial, there are also these couple of references, who we believe may be to a Russian oligarch who's known to be very close to Vladimir Putin and who's known to have had extensive business dealings with Manafort. His name is Oleg Deripaska. He appears in at least, we think this is references to him in these emails that are described in the evidence list that prosecutors have submitted. We're going to have more on Deripaska's role in the next Manafort trial coming up in just a moment tonight. But, you know, this next Manafort trial was always going to be a difficult prospect for him, right? You don't have the wind at your back when you're coming off 8 convictions, 8 felony federal convictions right before you start a new trial on 7 more federal felony counts. In terms of the president's legal jeopardy, though, this second Manafort trial has got a lot of Russian stuff in it. It's a lot closer to the original concerns related to Russia that started the special counsel's investigation in the first place. After initial reports last week, stoked in part by the president himself, that he might be considering a pardon for Paul Manafort following his conviction in Virginia, tonight Gabriel Sherman reports at VanityFair.com that the president is so committed to the idea of pardoning Paul Manafort now that he's willing to do it even over the objections of his White House counsel, Don McGahn. Quote, Trump has told people he's considering bringing in a new lawyer to draft a Manafort pardon if McGahn won't do it. Well, in that context, tonight, Wall Street Journal breaks the news that Manafort was trying to do a deal. Manafort, the guy who would not flip. Manafort, the guy who's going all the way to trial not once but twice. The one guy implicated in the Trump-Russia scandal who absolutely would not do a deal with prosecutors and was praised by the president for that. Manafort has apparently been trying to do a deal with prosecutors. According to Aruna Viswanathan at the Wall Street Journal tonight, Manafort's defense team started conversations with Mueller's prosecutors about a potential plea deal while the Virginia jury was deliberating over Manafort's fate in his first trial. Quote, Paul Manafort's defense team held talks with prosecutors to resolve a second set of charges against the former Trump campaign chair. The plea discussions occurred as a Virginia jury was spending 4 days deliberating tax and bank fraud charges against Manafort. The talks between Manafort's defense team and prosecutors in the special counsel's office were aimed at forestalling a second related trial for Manafort, which is scheduled to begin on September 17th. But the Journal also reports that although Paul Manafort and his defense team started those talks with the prosecutors in the special counsel's office, the talks did not result ultimately in a deal. And this is where it gets very intriguing. Quote, the plea talks on the second set of charges stalled over issues raised by special counsel Robert Mueller. What issues? Quote, it isn't clear what those issues were, and the proposed terms of the would-be plea deal could not immediately be determined. As the president openly mulls the prospect of pardoning Paul Manafort to try to get himself out of this corner of this giant legal mess he's now in. This new reporting at the Wall Street Journal tonight, does this mean that Paul Manafort was offering to cooperate with prosecutors for the first time ever? Could this mean that he wasn't offering to cooperate, but his defense team was nevertheless trying to make his second trial go away? If they weren't offering his cooperation in exchange for making those charges go away, what else would they have to offer? There's ways to figure out the answers to these questions. We're going to take our best shot at it next. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.